welcome to another episode of Roll of Attention, dear viewer. Tonight we have something extremely special. So, you may remember that in episode 39 we have reviewed a story called A Warrior's Reward, one which we later found out gotten by horrible means. But regardless, that terrible event has made us well, for the lack of a better term, an ally, a friend, who is now on our podcast, an author, speaker, coach, and as he himself claims, certified positive psychology practitioner, which I'm going to ask a couple of questions about because I'm fascinated by that title. Anthony Simeone is on our podcast tonight. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you very much. It's great to finally meet all you fine gentlemen. So this is great. I'm really happy to be here. Very humbled by your appreciation for my writing, such as it is. So it's great meeting you all, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, and yeah, go on. Actually, what were you
Yeah, I
gonna
was gonna say it is our pleasure actually, and might be jumping the gun, but I am actually really happy to have you on for. It's well, I'll have to hear what your story is first, but it's a great feeling that our podcast actually made some sort of a help you
Impact.
write a sequel to your story. Yeah, I'm really happy about that.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah. So I mean, it was.
yeah,
Go ahead, Nikki.
No, you go. You're the guest.
No, thanks. I mean, yeah, it was an interesting little path that we took to get to know each other. Uh, and so I was upset at first when this website, there was some website that you guys found my story on, but I had originally published it on Wattpad, and somebody took it, and I guess theft is the sincerest form of flattery to brutalize a saying. But it was someone took it, some website called dndadventures.com, which is all riddled with like ads and malware now.
Yeah.
But you guys had found it on this website that someone was, it's a D&D hobby website someone set up for their D&D games. And like they were like, I guess one of my story, Warrior's Reward, was like inspirational story, in their inspirational story section. So, but if they hadn't stolen the story, I wouldn't have met all of you fine gentlemen. So serendipity works in mysterious ways, right? So at least they gave me credit. At least they put my name on the
Exactly.
story, in this. But so and then it was, you guys reached out to me on Twitter and said, "Hey, is this you?" Formerly Twitter, now X. You guys reached out to me and said, "Hey, is this you? Is this your story?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay, great." And we're doing a podcast on it. And I'm like, me? I'm like a nobody as far as writers are concerned. So, really been kind of dabbling and writing for years. I've been, since I was a teenager, I've been writing and dabbling in storytelling and fiction, but I've also been a game master and a role player for that whole time. And those two things are interlinked for me. And thus, the culmination of it was years ago, I wrote that story, Warrior's Reward, as sort of something like an idea for an adventure I had, but it was something that, and we can get into the whole impetus of it. But it starts off in a tavern, and I know in your episode 39, you had some of you took issue with that, but it was an intentional send up of that.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. It was not
Yeah.
us. It was the magazine.
Editor. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
so
It was.
actually submitted a story called "The Devil's Daughter"
Okay.
to a Canadian magazine, and one of the things that they wrote, one of the first and most baffling things that they said to actually was, yeah, we don't take these type of stories anyway, but your story starts in a tavern. I mean, are you living in 2012?
to be more accurate, on their page that says the criteria for the kind of stories that we look for, they said one of the lines they said was, it's best not to start your adventure story in a tavern unless it's for a very good reason. And basically after that, I was like, man, that's actually such a accurate observation of all fantasy adventure stories. They all do start in a
Yeah,
tavern.
that's true. Yeah, I mean it's true to a point. I've seen that no about the tavern thing on other publication sites, or probably on that one too. I don't know what publication it was, but I've seen that before. And for me, this story was a purposeful send up of that starting a tavern thing, because as you read in the story, the tavern keeper, and this was always a thought in my head when I was role playing too, like no one ever thinks about who the tavern keeper is. They're just an NPC. So what if the tavern keeper was more than an NPC, or even more than just a retired fighter, and like they usually do
Oh,
in
that's
like
another
stories
classic.
or
Yeah, retired fighter, retired veteran. Like guy who has seen too
right.
much and now just wants to lay low. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Exactly. So this guy is he's something else. And obviously we can get into spoiler territory or whatever, but so that's sort of the impetus of how we, got together, and a little bit of my background as a writer. And I've been really trying to get serious again about my writing, and it's serendipitous meetings with people like you that kind of lit the fire back under me, with you guys kind of showing interest, and kind of, I never thought someone would do a hour-long blog post, or analog hour-long vlog rather, talking about one of my stories. So you guys are like, all right, if you guys gave me like a sense of a shot of self-worth,
I'd like to
honestly.
re- I'd like to
So
remind you, Anthony, that I gave you the highest score. Just saying. No.
you did.
Um.
I didn't forget.
No.
Check is in the mail.
I'm sure XJ and Robert will will support me in saying this, but this is I mean, for me at least, it is a surreal experience that something that I've done inspired you back to continue to do the sequel, and we'll talk about the sequel in a little bit. But I think first, the most quickest of recaps for those who don't know what has transpired in A Warrior's Reward, right? An individual, a veteran, comes to a tavern far away after he has been set up for something he has not done, and he relies on someone who he considers an old ally of sorts, one he doesn't really know but has shared history with, and then through trials and tribulations they become more and more woven in together until the titular character is betrayed, and the tavern keeper turns out to be a horrible sorcerer who wants to prolong his life. Right. So you said in regarding A Warrior's Reward that this was, it was a deliberate change of tropes, and that, I rewatched our episode to sort of like remember exactly our discussions, and also looked at my notes about the episode. And for me, I felt that strongly. I felt strongly that at the end, that this subversion really struck home to me, that everything about the story was sort of like putting it on its head. And did you when you first created the story, how did you first start sharing it? Did you show it to some of your friends? Did you put it on the website immediately? Like how did that happen, after it was finished?
I sent it to some friends to read it, and then, I put it on that. I think I've had it on various sites over the years where I've signed up to kind of show my work online in this, this ever-growing age of self-publishing and, self-promoting when it comes to being a writer. So I put it on a couple different sites, and it finally wound up on Wattpad. Much to the chagrin of my kids. Apparently, that's really like, my kids are Gen Z. I'm Gen X, so they're like, Dad, you're way too old to be putting stuff on Wattpad. So I'm like, okay, it was just an easy place to put my writing, but whatever. Um,
Well,
so
kids,
that
your dad
yeah,
is on a podcast, so who's cool now?
yeah. So yeah, eat that, right? Eat it.
uh, yeah, okay, that's great. So you've published it, you put it on Wattpad. The this website took it, um they did put it in the inspirational column, so I mean, that's another nice point for them. And when I was
Yeah.
searching for you, because all I had to go on was Anthony Simeone, Simeone, sorry. I put that in Google and I looked at people. And I found a British professor who died like 100 years ago. It's like, okay, that's not him. And I found someone in India, and then I was like, I need to look for somebody who matches the style of writing. And I guessed that an American individual has written A Warrior's Reward, and I was correct. So I found Anthony Simeone in Philadelphia, and I reached out to you on Twitter. What was what was it like getting a message from me being like, hey, we're talking about your story?
No, it like I said earlier, I mean, it was okay. This is great. Someone actually liked what I wrote. You like me. You really like me. No, it's just it's as someone who's been like really too much of a dabbler over my life and kind of been, really, kind of putting off getting serious about my writing. It was like, okay, so this is like another little push of like, okay, someone does like what you do. Because as a writer, it's a very lonely thing. You guys are all writers as well, I think. You guys are all at least have some aspirations, as of, you guys are writing. So if you're sending some of me, we're exchanging writing now, kind of reading each other's stuff. And it's, but you know what it's like. You guys know what it's like to be a writer. It's very solitary. You can have a lot of imposter syndrome if you're like me, where you're like, who the heck am I? And it's the world has changed. Who's reading stories anymore? Should I be doing like a podcast of my stories or whatever? No one has time to read things anymore, et cetera, et cetera. So it was like this validation, this sense of validation when you guys messaged me. So yeah, it was great. It was a great feeling.
Awesome. Well, it was a great feeling for me to find you. I felt this euphoria, Sherlock Holmes esque
Yeah.
feeling. I have to admit, when I was like, all right, it is him. He did write this. And it was such a shame that I only found you after we already recorded everything. Um, but but you know, one of the aspects that I really enjoyed about the first story. We're about to talk about the second story in a second. I just have a couple of questions about the first one. Was the world building? So where did you take that world building from? Was that from your D&D sessions? Was that something from, were you building up a world in your head? How did that come about?
Yeah, it was like any DM worth their salt. You always try to make your homebrew D&D world. So that was
Yeah.
kind of the hints at the world that you see in that first story are sort of cobbled together from bits and pieces of ideas for campaign settings.
Mm,
And I really didn't go too deep into it in the story, but there's hints of it, of a kingdom, things like that. And at first I think I cut down the story a lot, just taking out too much of those tidbits, too much exposition dump of the world, and trimmed it down back in the day when I first wrote it. But yeah, basically to answer your question, it was cobbled together from my D&D days.
and when did you start playing D&D actually?
The late 80s. I really started with the tail end of D&D first edition, and
Okay.
then not long after I started, second edition came into play with all of the D&D second edition had all the different settings, all the different campaign
Yeah,
settings.
yeah.
So, which really inspired me. So I'm like, oh man, but I would always have this nagging feeling as a burgeoning wannabe, eternally aspiring writer. I always had that niggling thing in the back of my head, like, oh, I should be making up my own campaign world. I should be drawing my own maps. I should be doing, instead of playing in Forgotten Realms or whatever other setting that D&D was pumping out.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's really where I cut my teeth was the age of second edition with all the settings.
All right. Okay. And my final question, when when you were writing the story, when was it actually written? What date? Like what edition of D&D were you playing at the time? Like can you remember those details?
Honestly, at the time, I wasn't. This was early. I think it was early 2000s when I originally wrote the story. If I'm wrong, if I'm not, I've looked at some of the file dates of the story, and I
Uh-huh.
think I was
Uh-huh.
writing it as far back as 2006. But
Uh-huh.
at the time, I wasn't playing D&D. So honestly, a part of the reason why I wrote that story was I was starting to pine for role playing again, and that was in the middle of a drought of not role playing.
Right.
So
So sort of an
honestly,
outlet.
yes, it was a catharsis. It was an outlet for, oh man, I haven't role played in forever. I really miss it. I'm gonna write this story that pops to mind.
Nice.
So yeah, it
Okay.
was kind of a young, yeah.
So I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to make you talk a little bit more in a sort of a monologue because I think everyone is eager to hear the summary for the second story, the Innkeeper's Burden. So Anthony Simeone himself will introduce his story.
Yeah, just as far as the story is concerned, the second story is Innkeeper's Burden. And it was really like I wanted to challenge myself to see how fast I could write something and if I could write something as a challenge from other people, which I'd done before in the past, but I'm like, I think that first story really needs a little something more to it. And so I decided to delve more into and tell it from the perspective of the innkeeper who, we're obviously deep in spoiler territory now for the first story. It
Yeah.
was, the innkeeper turns out to be a nefarious sorcerer who uses his inn as a way to entrap people to be hosts for this parasite, this arcane parasite that he takes the venom from, or this elixir from this parasite to prolong his life. And that's at the culmination of the first story, which honestly, if I'm looking back to critique myself a little bit, maybe I could have given a little foreshadowing in the story that he had some nefarious plans and then, maybe, but I was also a younger writer then. So,
Mm.
but just to kind of answer some of the constructive criticism, yeah, maybe I could have, because honestly, the story could probably, maybe the original story could maybe be a little too tame or not, like why am I reading the story of this adventure? But anyway, I'm digressing. But that was Warrior's Reward, but Innkeeper's Burden is okay, I pick up the story right after the sorcerer Ferran has spent a few weeks kind of luxuriating in this elixir after he's found this new host because the parasite uses up the essence and the life force and the body of its hosts after a while to sustain it. So Farron needed a new host, and he found this older warrior, Thidrek of Narad. Thidrek is this elderly or aging warrior, but still robust. So he's the new host. But after spending a few weeks of, kind of taking the elixir again, Farron sort of discovers this disturbing sensation in his own body. And it turns out that somehow, in the second story, early on, we figure out that potentially the parasite has, for lack of a better term, impregnated Farron through his taking of this the life-sustaining fluids of this parasite. It has somehow impregnated him, the Farron, the sorcerer, in a twist of fate, sort of an ironic, sort of karmic twist of fate. He's been impregnated himself. So now he's like, okay, he's obviously self-serving. What can I do to save myself? So that's where the story sort of starts. That he's like, okay, this is the new complication. Is that, oh, great, I have one of these parasites in me now. How can I rectify this so I don't die? Because obviously I'm a selfish sorcerer that wants to live forever. So yeah, so that's where do you want me to keep going, describing sort of the plot of the
Um,
story, or
I mean,
you guys
I
want to
think
chime in? And
yeah, I think we can start on just talking about how we felt about the story. I think this is a good way in, and then if people are excited, which I'm sure a lot of them are, for this is a story that has been written because of this podcast. So if you're watching this, you have to read it. If you don't, I mean, I'm gonna be very upset with you. So let's see, Robert, how did you like the sequel to Where's Reward, The Innkeeper's Burden?
I liked it a lot better than the first story, actually.
Mm,
Both were well written and both interesting, especially from the character's point of view. But the second one has the added mystery of. I'm just looking at my notes here to remember what her name was. The woman who doesn't like Ferran, Jerica. Yeah,
Jericho,
very
yes.
good character. Um, by the way, I want to ask the author, have you read Jack Vance's The Eyes of the Overworld?
a long time ago, I read Vance. That's sort of like the Appendix N reading from the D&D, back of the D&D, AD&D book, yeah, Vance. I read it ages ago in like my sort of whirlwind tour of Appendix N. I have, yeah.
'Cause this particular Vance, The Eyes of the Overworld, is definitely a picaresque tale, like your rather wicked but in some ways engaging character. Can't actually call him a hero. But also there's this parasite business. Now the parasite in Vance is Fux, who's a creature from the star Achenar and who tends to merge into one's viscera and clamp barbs across one's liver, especially if you're not doing what he wants you to do. And it reminded me of this one. Anyway,
Yeah, and that trope of the parasite. I know it's definitely not anything new, and it's been so long since I read that particular part of Vance's, oeuvre, so to speak, that but I mean, I'm sure I wasn't quite remembering him or
no.
that instance of it, but I knew it's not necessarily the most original of ideas, but again,
Well,
what can I do different with it?
the way you treat it is quite original because the atmosphere of the story is different from that of Vance. It's less light-hearted. Although there is wit in your story, it's not a light-hearted story. It's quite edgy, I would say, and edgy.
He means that in a good way, all right, Robert.
The term the kids use now is grimdark.
That's right. Grimdark. That's my favorite word. As the kid of the podcast. What about what about the maid, the Jerica, her name? What about her that you enjoyed so much, Robert?
She's quite a formidable character, and she obviously did have her suspicions of the so-called innkeeper, that he was much more than an innkeeper. But it's not overplayed, this suspicion. You just carry on reading and you realize in the end that she can't have been too astonished to find out that he was a sorcerer. I like the way it was done anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Not too heavy-handed at all.
Yeah, and again, it's that the character of the barmaid who is just there to sort of be ogled by the patrons at a tavern or an inn, and just kind of to subvert that and to do a send up of that trope. And what mystery surrounds her? What's her background?
Yeah, what is she about? She reminds me. Now, when I make a comparison, then I mean that as in like it's as inspiring as, so to speak, the woman in Beyond the Black River, where Conan is fighting on the coast, and so is his friend, the titular character, not the titular character, but the character of the main character of the story, and they come up to this barn that is aflame, and there's this woman that comes out, and she is leading the other girls out of danger with a weapon in her hand. It kind of reminded me of that character. In ferocity and how formidable she was.
And that brings me to another point. That brings me to another point just quickly. So maybe if Robert has any other ideas, we can go back to him. I'm sorry I keep interrupting him, but the fact that you guys usually review, great stories from the back of the day, like a Conan story or something, and then my humble story gets to be tucked into your podcast is amazing. So, but thank you for, I stand amidst giants as a small little halfling when it comes to all these other people's stories you review. But yeah, again, flattered, very flattered. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No problem. I do agree that Robert E. Howard is a giant, at least in my heart. Yeah, Robert, do you have any other initial thoughts?
Well, I'd just like to congratulate Anthony for not including any dragons in his story.
No dragons, not a single dragon. Hey, the word dragon was used in reference to how how Ferran's chest feels, like a dragon's in his chest. But other than that, that was just an analogy, just a metaphor, just a
Are there
metaphor, and no actual
but
dragon.
are there dragons in this universe where our
Mm,
friend Ferran lives?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's a little
Yeah.
more low creature, more human sort of setting, as far as I'm
Right.
concerned.
Like Berserk or
Yeah,
Warhammer. Okay.
more aberrations than anything else. More
Yeah.
more cosmic horror, less traditional fantasy.
That's what we like. That's
Yeah.
what I like at least. XJ, why don't you jump on? What were your initial thoughts of the Innkeeper's Burden?
So I like it quite a lot. I like it about as much as the Warrior's Burden actually. So I mean the two, it's hard for me to compare the two. I take back my words. It's hard for me to compare the two because the second story had a very different feel from the first one. It is. I actually thought it was more light-hearted than the first one, and I don't know what that says about me, my
A
outlook in
lot.
life.
I, I,
I
cards on the
definitely
yeah,
purposely go ahead. I'm sorry.
cards on the table. I agree with XJ, so we're both awful. Anyway, carry on, Anthony.
No, I definitely purposely, I just have to say, I definitely purposely changed the tone. Again, trying to shift to Farron's point of view versus Thidrek. Switching, Farron has a more sort of like sarcastic view of the world and a little more bitter, a little more jaded than Thidrek, but so yeah, you definitely picked up on that difference in tone for sure.
Yeah, and I think like I don't know if this is where you drew your inspiration. It doesn't sound like it from your earlier description, but I remember Robert actually saying in our previous podcast as a suggestion that Farron had indigestion and then become a good guy, and I was like, that parasite thing business sounds a lot like indigestion. And Farron
Mhm.
did turn out to be a good guy. So I guess what I really want to know is if you decided to pick up on Robert's thread, and what made you prefer that over my very good suggestion and Nikki's very good suggestion too.
Nikki's
Yeah, I think
suggestion.
I don't know. I have to say, if I can be so bold, I think Robert was the staunchest critic in a good way, constructively, of Warrior's Reward of the first story. And the critics, people who have a little more of a constructive criticism to say usually get more attention from the aspiring author's ear, right?
Mm.
So, but that's what we need. We need
Your
someone
story
to say,
sucks. Anyway,
okay,
so
yeah. But no, he definitely. I was like, okay, that's a challenge. How can I incorporate if I'm challenging myself? It's a writing contest. Okay, he said, hey, he should have indigestion, and it was kind of like a throwaway. It was a joke, and but I'm like, no, but that's kind of funny. Indigestion is kind of mundane. It's kind of funny to think of this powerful sorcerer getting indigestion, but what would a sorcerer's indigestion be caused by, right?
Mm.
So
mm.
it totally, Robert, tip of the hat to Robert. That was his idea. That was his jest, and I took it and ran with it. So, yeah.
Well, it is only a craftsman can take something raw and then turn it into something beautiful, which is I think what you did with
Thank
Robert's
you.
story idea. Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you.
No problem. No problem at all. Actually, carry on. You got
Yeah.
anything else?
So I think for me, what is good about the story? It is a lot more raw than the first one. It does need more refinement, but you haven't picked up the pen for quite a number of years, I'm guessing. So that's something that can be done on the second or third round of editing. But aside from that, I am really quite intrigued by the world that you've started to flesh out a lot more in the Innkeeper's Burden. I am a setting person first and foremost. I'm less interested in characters. So your backdrop is beginning to look more interesting, especially the tension between the witch in the swamp and the sorcerer himself, which I guess if we were to go back to D&D terms, it would be like the difference between a proper mage school and then a charisma based caster like a sorcerer or a witch kind of thing. And I'm starting to see like that setup being built, and then more of the background. We're starting to see more of the magic system of the world being fleshed out, and then the best thing to me of all is that you left the story on a bit of a cliffhanger, which implies that there's more to come. Am I right?
You've heard it here first. I guess this is the official word. It's like you guys have inspired me so much, and I fell back in love with my own writing and I guess my own story. That I think there needs to be at least one more story to
Amazing.
make it a trilogy. You got to have
Amazing.
a fantasy trilogy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's fantasy and there's multiple parts, the best ones are the trilogies. I agree.
Yeah,
Right.
love it.
Exactly. So, and hey, listen, I'm listening. So, Jerica, if you guys like Jerica as a character, I've had some ideas percolating of what her backstory is. So,
Ooh.
I'm gonna have to incorporate something cool about her and see maybe we'll
Right.
see
Well,
more of her.
so that you incorporate all of my suggestions, I'm gonna be very harsh right now.
Okay, send me the notes. Send me the notes. Send me the cliff notes of your suggestions. I'll
But
be sure to take them into account.
I have to admit the trope inversion was not something that I picked up during my read throughs. But it does seem to be something that it sounds like from what you have been describing about your writing and such, seems to be something that you're quite into. May I ask why?
That was something that, there was a writer a few years ago that, and I didn't really necessarily, there was a guy who kind of was another writer, and I didn't really necessarily get along with him too well, but he always stressed like you need to do new things, like you need to do, and try not to make it to be just a gimmick, but actually explore a different thing, explore a tried and true trope from a different direction, and sometimes you can, get away with that. So I forget what his name is. That's how much I like the guy. But he said, he really kind of impressed upon me, like, you need to do something different. You need to really kind of, but it's just like, it's just these, and I think part of it is like, yeah, people like the one admonition on that website that you submitted a story to, XJ, where it's like, no taverns. They're like, well, okay, well, what if the tavern, what if the tavern is the impetus for something new and different? Give it a chance. But I can see they probably get inundated with like, that scene where, everybody goes to the tavern and it's not anything new. It's just like, we just all met here. Now let's go kill the dragon, So, but it's, there's always a way to refresh a trope. But so again, that's another challenge. And, honestly, to your observation, that was a very astute observation. Yes. I mean, there could be some more polish to this draft of the story. And, again, the pressures of the day job, adult responsibility, things like that. I definitely didn't, edit. I didn't do a thorough redo and edit of the story as much as I wanted to this time around. So it's interesting. Warrior's Reward was written many years ago when I think I was a less accomplished writer, but I spent a lot of time on it over the course of, like, say, a decade, revisiting and rewriting it and I republished at different places versus, okay, I'm going to challenge myself. And yes, granted, I think I started writing Innkeeper's Burden in February and just kind of published it a couple weeks ago. But that was just because pressures of life, day job, mortgage, writing other things, running D&D games. So it's like in between all of that, I was cobbling this story together and writing it. And I'm like, so it does need an edit. And if I finish this third story, again, I'm trying to use you guys as my accountability buddies. Like, you guys are keeping me honest. The truth be told,
I'll be
if I
coming
write
to your
this,
door. I'll be knocking. I'll be like,
yeah,
"Where's the fat one?"
Come out for a visit. If I finish the
Thank you.
third story, I'm gonna go back and revisit and rewrite, like, and edit, like, all three to cobble them together. Maybe do a novella. Try to publish it somewhere. I mean, try to get serious about it.
That sounds like a fantastic idea, and I just have one thing to say to you, Anthony, which is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I mean, you
I try to live by that.
as an author, I think we should have a certain level of pride in the craftsmanship at the very least, even if we are not really a very original writer or anything like that. If the only thing that we ever do is stereotypical adventure novels with everything starting in a tavern, and all our characters are barbarians, chair throwing barbarians. I mean, what the hell? But at least the sentences and the prose need to flow together. But at the end of the day, having a piece of work is better than not having a piece of work.
Yeah.
As long as it's not totally a piece of something else, right? Hopefully. It's like,
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
obviously, but I think if any one of us here would take pride in having well constructed prose, and that if we look at something and we feel that it is terrible, I'm sure all of us sitting here would want to change it, our own writing anyway. Yeah. So
oh, sorry.
Yeah. I just want to end off that I can't wait to see
course.
the next installment. I'm like that actually is the most important question for me. Are you continuing? And it appears you are, and I'm very satisfied. Yeah, I want to see the third one. And
I think I have to. Yeah.
yeah, you have to now. Exactly.
Yeah.
Don't disappoint me, bro.
Whoa! Don't give him like post guilt.
No. This is what I need to do, though.
This
Like,
is what you need.
honestly,
All right.
as this,
If you don't get it done,
I need like death threats or something to finish writing sometimes.
Right. Listen,
No, but honestly, it's like,
I'm happy
life
to
gets
give
in
you
the
the
way.
death
Life
threats. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes, please do. Please do. Listen, I think that's what the new version of Twitter is expressly made for that, I think. So keep messaging.
I mean, that is where we met. So. But it was
Exactly.
before it became X. All right, let's not get into this for a second.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so let me. Sorry, actually, are you done?
Yeah, I am pretty much. And so,
okay.
Nikki, tell us what you think.
Of course. Well, it sucks. Here's what you need to know. Kidding. Right. So I'm gonna start from afar a little bit. The first story, A Warrior's Reward. When I said this in episode 39, when I started reading it, I was like, "Ooh, okay." So, this is a story about two guys, and they have created this, brotherhood between one another, and I've read that many times before, but it's good written, so I'll continue. And I go, and then, as it progressed, I was like, okay, yeah, and then he's gonna die, giving the main character the guilt to push on, and yeah. Oh, he's back. Oh, damn. And you put a blindfold on me, on A Warrior's Reward, and then you took it off violently, and then you did this gruesome scene of the parasite, feasting on the energy of this good guy, and I felt really bad for him. And it made me happy in a way, because one of the things that I really enjoy doing in both writing and Dungeons and Dragons is a setup with a twist. And the fact that I wasn't capable of seeing the twist coming, where I usually am, really zeroed me in on the story and really made me want to reread it. and I'm actually going to disagree with you on one point. I feel like if you reread it, you can see some signs that this Ferran guy is a little bit like he's sort of letting our main character talk about all of the information rather than dislodging it all himself. He's just like adding on to the flame, so somewhat, and whether that was intentional or not, it's what I saw, right? And I was like, oh my god, it was there all along. It was this whole Sherlock Holmes thing. Um, and now the second story, right? So that was the how the first story felt, and the second story is, well, what happens after such a agonizing ending? If you look at the end of the story by Clark Ashton Smith, right? He has a small epilogue at the end where he basically talks about what has transpired with the character, and it's very gloomy and dark, right? Because he's trying to instill into the reader how horrifying that whole thing that they've read was, right? To double down on it. And you decided to do something very different, and I agree with XJ that the Innkeeper's Burden is much more lighthearted comparatively to A Warrior's Reward. And not only is it lighthearted, it's also bloody and it's real and it goes places. And that is a mixture that I really enjoy. In fact, my favorite sweet is a salted caramel, right? Two things that shouldn't go there, but salted caramel is the best. I enjoy things a lot more when you have this shift, when you have this change. For as someone very astute said, you could never be good in a world where there is no evil, right? And
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
For the Innkeeper's Burden to take that concept and sort of like work with it, I had a real gem of a time, reading through it. Except for one thing, and that is Wattpad. Wattpad, I had to register to read Anthony
Oh,
Simeone's story. I get it. You want more people registering, but this is like,
I think
come on.
I think that is only on if you're trying to read it on the phone though. Because
Really?
I came up to that and I was like, what? I have to register? No way, Wattpad. Then I went to my desktop and I was able to see it without having to register, and I'm like, dude, take it.
Well,
yeah. So,
I
but
I have been
but
duped.
Robert, you didn't have any. Robert didn't have any issues either doing it, or sorry for making. Yeah, I didn't know they were going to force people to register.
Only on
Yeah, it's all good.
the phone, I think.
Only on
Yeah,
the
only on the
phone.
phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So now I have revealed how I read it. I read it on the phone. I read
That,
it two times. I've read it once when you just sent it to me, and then I sent it to the guys and said like, look at this, and they were like, oh, we got to do an episode on this. And then I read it the second time a couple of days ago. And my second read has shown me some of the things that XJ said about some parts being raw, but it has also showed me that the turn of phrase that you use in some of these instances is really interesting. These associations that you make in your writing, they sort of remind me of a lot of Russian prose, what we do with comparisons, and you find a very beautiful way to do that. So for that I really commend you. Um, my favorite character has to be the witch, especially when she's like, "Oh yeah, you're all high and mighty, you stupid wizard, but then you have to come to me anyway, every single time." And I felt that. I'm like, that's, you could really put that into perspective in
That
so many different ways.
that is a Thanos line. I was like,
Yeah.
I read that and I was like, that's Thanos right there.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's really good. That whole sequence I really enjoyed. It was so good. I wish well, you know what I'm gonna be asking for in the sequel, I guess. But there's two things actually that I think that would be really good. But let me get to that. Um, to to say that the world that this is happening in is cruel is, I think, a bit of an understatement, because I like the fact that cruelty just comes from all sides here. And when Ferran is faced with the fact that cruelty can come from any place, he starts regretting that it is also something that he outputs into the world. And I really like that transition. It felt natural for him to start hating that part of himself, because he saw the town being sort of like attacked so viciously. The sequence with all of the contraptions, man, it sends me back to 2003, when I was sitting down playing second edition with a bunch of pals, and we were walking into rooms, and there's like, all right, there's a big baboon made out of silver with green eyes, and like we try to get the eyes, they're emeralds, they shoot rays. Damn, the rays turn into snakes. What? And so on and so forth. It was so fun. It felt like I'm back there, and I'm just having a grand old time reminiscing and then maybe that's why it felt so lighthearted to me, because it made me think about when I was a child.
Yeah, it was, but it was also like a kind of a gruesome scene, but you can kind of see all those. But it's kind of funny because all those really kind of terrible raiders are just getting, murdered by these magical traps, right? And it's just
That's
like,
right.
they
Yeah.
kind of deserve it, right? It's like kind of like that line in True Lies, like, have you killed people? He's like, yeah, but they were all bad.
They were
Like
all bad.
right, yeah, but
Yeah.
they were all bad. Like that's
You
exactly
do it
right.
better.
So it's like
I
they
also
kind of just
that
Yeah.
sequence. I need to say this. I like the fact that Ferran didn't face roll that encounter. Like he actually did sustain some heavy injuries from that, and he got played by his own contraption.
Yeah, that was cool. Yeah, you mean the
yeah.
second sequence when they
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, when he's facing off against the Crimson Sorcerer,
Yeah.
right? And I think in the Crimson Sorcerer he sees sort of this reflection of himself, this younger, sort of arrogant, version of himself, and like what sorcery can twist you into. So it's he kind of has that arc where he starts changing, and he already was in the process, but
Mm.
and maybe if I can do a rewrite. And it's interesting because I feel like if I were to cobble this together into a novella, maybe with three parts, three stories, three parts,
Yeah.
would I keep the first story, I would say, was written from for a term that maybe not everyone will get, high Gygaxian. I
Oh
feel
yeah,
like,
I get that.
the way guy, very formal sort of, or an old fashioned way of storytelling for fantasy, maybe from the early 20th century, inspired more by a Vance or a Robert E. Howard or an H.P. Lovecraft, where the language, I feel like, was very formal, very stilted, very old fashioned. And if that's from Thidrek's perspective, maybe that's how he sees the world and himself, in this sort of heroic fantasy, false kind of way that betrays him in the end. Because he wants this reward for his years of service to this king that he failed. And it's so maybe I would keep that first part in that sort of more old fashioned way of writing a fantasy story, but then it's Ferran's from his perspective. The second part is from more of a modern, more grimdark, modern sort of storytelling voice.
Mm.
So I think I think that's an interesting juxtaposition between the stories from my perspective. I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Then the third part could be from the barmaid's point of view. So you'd have two progressions. You'd have from warrior to sorcerer, and then from sorcerer to barmaid. So 1, 2, 3. I think that would work nicely, but I don't know what sort of tone you'd adopt for the part 3.
No, you gotta go with the witch being the third person. I completely
No, no, no,
Oh,
no,
wait a
no.
minute. Here we go.
Love triangle between the barmaid, the witch, and Ferran. Yeah.
What? All right. Both of you are out of this room. I'm gonna talk to Anthony personally. This is horrible. So stop giving me horrible ideas.
Well, what's on your wish list, Nikki? What's on your wish list for a
Well,
third
I'm
story?
glad you asked. Hold on.
He's got
Where am I?
bust out the scroll, right?
Yeah, exactly. Uh, one last thing I want to mention about the Innkeeper's Burden before I go into it, so I don't forget. Um, the the way I would say if this was a novella, uh, I would expect there to be a more of a like fight scene at the end with the Red Wizard. You'd want to make that confrontation more enjoyable. It's really cool to see just Ferran be like, okay, you're like one hit die nobodies. I'm just gonna use the second level spell. You're all dead. Fair enough, right? But I think it would give that oomph to the last battle if you want it to be like a continual thing. As far as what I want in the sequel, um, all right. So first of all, I want the king plotline to come back. That really captured
Mm.
me in the first story. And this, if this is a novella, you want the first story being somehow referenced in the third one. That isn't just what happened in the second one. So now that you have this setup, that it's a great setup. Use it. Use it in the third one. Make it about or make it about any other point that you described. You know, maybe they're gonna go and look for the real afterlife, and so just something that like is referring to the flow, right, of the story. Now it's clear that the Innkeeper's burden ends on Farron deciding to help the protagonist from the first story, and I think that's great. um I don't think we need to see it. I think we need to just understand it, that this has transpired. I would even maybe make it a bit of a mystery as to how exactly he got it done and how the protagonist from the first story feels about it, right? Um, I want the witch as much as possible. This woman needs to be validated that she has helped the sorcerer, and now maybe she can begin her Vegeta arc. I don't know if you know Dragon Ball, right? But now she can start becoming the good guy as well. Um, and and this is going to be a complete cop out, right? Because I'm sure it's sort of like cliche, but I really mean it because I can see it in both of the previous tales. Um, at the end of the day, what I want most, if you ignore all of what we said, the love triangle, the barmaid perspective, the cool and awesome idea about the king. I don't know who selected it, but um, I want you to have fun when you're writing it because you can clearly see a Warrior's Reward is written from someone who is enjoying the writing and they're tinkering with it. And then the second one, it's the full fuel, the inspiration, the awe of recognition, so to speak. And the third one, whatever it will be, whatever it's about, just make sure you like what you're writing, and I'm sure we'll follow because the two times that you did write what you wanted to see is what we enjoyed.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean I really did enjoy writing both of them, and they were written so far apart, really, in my life and just like who I am as a writer. So
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like I had a good time the second time around, and ideas are percolating. So I really
All
do
right.
need some accountability. But so I have some ideas. But no, those are good points. You really do need the callback. You can't just have just like in a good D&D adventure. If there's no consequences to the player's actions slash character's actions, the world is just a fun house and nothing ever flow. You need some verisimilitude, right? That's a really big thing now. DMing is becoming this high art form where people are getting paid for it now, right? Like you see, so it's like verisimilitude. You need the appearance of life in your adventures, but you also need that
Yeah.
in storytelling. So if it's just kind of you're blindly going forward and forgetting the past of the story that came before, it takes away from that realism and that verisimilitude. So for sure. Yeah. So no, that's all great ideas. I'm definitely gonna have to
My
plunge ahead. and
my
and I
I
can get this off of Wattpad.
yes, please do. And I'm too dumb to know verisimilitude, but I have
Google it.
to tell you one of the most interesting thing to me as a reader, not as a writer, is following an author's work for a very long time, and you can gradually see how they change. and that the
Yeah.
things that they care about starts to shift, and the story focus becomes different over time. And I definitely see that in the Innkeeper's Burden, because the relationship between Ferran and the barmaid feels real. It feels real. Even the relationship between Ferran and the witch feels real. You know?
Favorite witch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
not. It's not
Yeah.
just. It's just not a. It's not just a random encounter. Kind
Yeah.
of thing. You
Yeah.
know, they have investments, so to speak, in the relationship between each other, and it mirrors. It kind of mirrors real life. I think it's like, you got some guy working, some person working in a place for a very long time, a small establishment, and then the boss keeps taking off, and of course she's gonna feel that way. It's like, what? Why are you dumping this on me all the time? Do your goddamn job, kind of thing.
I
Yeah, and
definitely
the
felt
fact that
like that.
he's this Yeah, the fact that he's this sorcerer, but he's still afraid of his employee who's got a bad attitude, his disgruntled employee, I thought was
It's
pretty
humanizing.
fun.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Right,
humanizing. Yeah, definitely.
exactly. And and really it's like, just thinking about the first story again, it's like, it's so grandiose, but it's told from the perspective of Thidrek, who might be a little full of himself because he always had these accolades. He was this very important person to, the bodyguard of the king, and he failed in his mission. So, keeping it like this traditional story of heroic daring do, and kind of keeping it in that old fashioned sort of tone really speaks to, I think, if you put it juxtaposed against the current story, it's like you can see it's like that fantasy breaks. And I think that might be the influence of reading Game of Thrones and other stories over the years, over the decades, there's these people who have these high ideals like Ned Stark, but what does honor get you in the end? It just gets your head lopped off. It's like playing with that idea too of like, oh, there's this heroic man and he's such a great warrior, but in the end, he's just a host for a horrible cosmic horror. So it's like that, but it's like keeping, and then that shift in tone. So if I'm, yeah, so that was really fun to play with. And, I'm also a big fan of Dune, where it's like beware of powerful men and, just this how they can fall and everything. So yeah, so those ideas were kind of in mind when I was writing that, but then, trying to have Thidrek and but then I'm hoping that Thidrek will have an arc. Everyone's going to have all more growth in the next story. So, but this is my inspiration to definitely finish it and refine things and then try to publish it somewhere and get it off like the internet, which is also, as an author publishing nowadays, I don't know what all of your aspirations are, but is it like, do you want to self-publish and just drop it on Amazon? Do you want to put it on a website and sell it through a website? Do you want to, so that's all kind of in my mind too. Like if I pull it together and I'm getting it off of these, I feel like I've been playing small. I don't know if you guys feel like that too, but I would also encourage both of you. I'm going to try to keep you guys accountable. And Robert, I don't know if you're writing, but I know XJ and Nikki are, but
Yeah.
if any of you are writing, it's like, let's not play small. Let's get it out there.
You're
What's
completely
that?
right. You're completely right. But I just loved Robert's. Yeah, like it was just such a defeatist way to be like, yeah, I guess I'm right.
Listen,
Anyway,
listen. I'm getting up there in years, and I'm sensing like the creeping of the Grim Reaper around me. I'm like, listen, I've been wanting to be a writer and author and be serious about it since I was a kid. Now I'm like in my late 40s, and I'm just like, but it's never too late. It's never too late
look at
to
George R. R. Martin. It's never too
exactly,
late. And now he's
exactly.
sitting
So
on his fucking laurels and is just enjoying all the money, and we're never getting the next book. Anyway, sorry.
No,
don't get me
no.
started on that. Yeah.
We will never get
But
the
no, but
next
it's
book.
yeah. But it's like, I'd like to keep in touch with all of you through your journeys. You guys,
Absolutely. I
and just to
just to answer your question, I did self-publish one book. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I'm gonna have to
Uh,
pick your brain on that. On Amazon? On Amazon?
on Amazon, correct. And the cool thing is they have print on demand, so you could have just a Kindle version, but also any one of your customers want a hardcover or a paperback, they can actually
One
get
second.
that. Yeah,
Okay.
and I think the difficulty of self-publishing is that you also have to do the marketing, which is not something I'm terribly interested in, to be honest. Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm considering something slightly different for whatever follows after that first book. Yeah.
I think it's worse than that.
Yeah, for sure.
I've
Sorry.
had it's worse than that because I've had 6 books published by a publisher, but I'm still expected to do all the marketing.
Really?
Yeah, and I don't do it, which is why I hardly sell any books. I'm not a marketer, I'm an author. So, you know, in the end, I just content myself with putting my work online for free. And I know that people look at it because I can read how many hits there are. So it doesn't matter whether if I don't get paid, not now.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Nikki. That's my book.
Yeah.
That all right. I'll have to pick that up. What's it called?
The Adventures of Longtail.
The Adventures of Long.
Nice. Wow, that's a tome. Look at that.
it's pretty big.
That's
it
thick.
it became bigger than I was actually surprised. I wanted to write a book that was half that length, and then it grew away from me.
I think
And then
yeah,
you
I think
failed.
Tolkien say the tale grew with the telling, right? Isn't that what he
Yeah.
said about Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
The
There's also
tale grew
this.
with the telling. It always does.
There's,
It
there's
always
a
does.
really
There you go.
handsome
Look at
picture
that.
of Akshay there, and he's,
Wow.
I think he's wearing the same hat.
Yes, the beanie's the same one.
That's amazing. Yeah, pick it up, and everyone who's watching, pick it up as well.
Yeah.
It's a good read. I have a comment about something that Anthony and XJ were discussing because I I had something happen last week that really made me rethink everything. And this comment about like don't let the perfect get in the way of good, right? When we think of someone who is a master of the art, if we go really high up there, internationally, culturally, you think of some maybe like a Japanese swordsman, blacksmith who makes swords, right, like a katana, and you see all those videos online of how perfectly they do it, and something like that. Um, what you don't see in the video is the 40 years that this dude has been doing this and has been doing it wrong, probably, right? What you're seeing is the end journey because this individual has been doing it for years and years with amazing teachers, most likely, right? And so on and so forth, and guidance in some ways. And we all get that guidance as authors. We see good books. We read them. We see good movies. We enjoy them. And to expect yourself to just be perfect from the get-go is actually the highest sense of hubris one can feel, and then we get frustrated with ourselves that we can't be as good as that. And I think the one thing we must remember is the fact that there's 40 years, right? It's the big journey, so to speak, to get there. So you have to keep writing, even if you feel like it's not as good as what you think you should be.
Yep. That's right. Absolutely.
To add on to that, the thing about any piece of work, and I'm actually a professional artist. I work in the VFX industry. As I never tire of reminding everyone. Sorry, no. The thing is, you try to do something right, it will never be perfect. That's the thing. It will never be perfect. You can spend the rest of your life trying to perfect something, and you will never get there. So you could either just get something to good enough and then push it out the door, or you could spend your entire life trying to chase that thing, which is a noble pursuit in and of itself. But then you gotta live with the fact that you're probably never going to publish that piece of work and nobody is going to see it. So
Unless
Yeah.
you're token.
True.
Unless you're token.
Yeah.
Then everyone will see it, and you're just lucky, aren't you? Token. All right. Anyway, sorry.
yeah. Well, okay. We're past an hour actually. So I want to ask if anyone's got any last words, any last thing you want to say, Anthony?
I have
Well,
one more
yeah, I mean,
question for Anthony.
Go ahead.
Anthony.
Yeah, go ahead.
So are you currently running games, and if so, did that affect your writing, the Innkeeper's Burden? You know, when it comes to being a dungeon
Yeah, I
master.
started running games again over the past decade or so in fits and starts, and now within the last couple years, I've really kind of reached out again and connected with a group. I was playing with friends, just gaming with friends for the longest time, and now I've connected with a bunch of people who were strangers and now they're friends.
Mhm.
And I'm going to be running some games at a local convention here starting next year, and I really haven't gone to cons before. My first con I really went to was Gary Con last year.
And you met
So, and
Larry
kind of
Elmore and Margaret Weiss.
met Larry
Ah,
Elmore, met Larry Elmore,
You
sweetest
gotta
guy
get
you'll
out
ever meet.
more, XJ.
Yeah,
what?
met Margaret
I said
Weiss.
you gotta get out more to meet people.
That's
So-
true.
Yeah, met Margaret Weiss.
I need to actually leave my apartment, which I barely do anymore.
So
Yeah, met.
yeah. Yeah, go on.
Go ahead.
Go on.
Yeah, no, and it was great. Yeah, and it was so I've been running, some games recently and for the past couple years. So yeah, it's been really great, and that's kind of lit a fire. But also takes away from the writing time. Prep. I'm usually a DM, so usually the
Mm,
prep time takes away from writing time.
mm.
Only so many hours in the day. Plus, there's all my, I know that, there's all those other things on my resume. Coach, speaker, you know, positive psychology
Yeah, what is
practitioner, which
that? You have to tell me what
they're
is this
actually
certified positive psychology?
it's Martin Seligman, who is a PhD professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Really has championed this discipline that's really kind of a couple decades old, called positive psychology. And I took a certification course to become a practitioner of that. And it's all about resilience. It's all about building resilience, using your positive emotions, not as like pretending the world isn't bad, but using your emotions actively to kind of cheer you up, bring you out of a funk, build resilience emotionally. So it's kind of like sort of that's really the kind of elevator pitch for it. It's not just like be happy at any point. It's really acknowledging that the world can be difficult, can be tough, but instead of having emotions inflicted upon you, you can say, okay, well, I'm going to actively take my thoughts to court, the negative thoughts to court, and I'm going to use this technique and that technique of, savoring the good moments in my life from the past, things like that. All different kinds of techniques that are positive psychology interventions to counterbalance, what is traditionally pathological, psychiatry, psychotherapy. So that's where he kind of came from. Martin Seligman said, okay, we treat all the pathology. We've been treating pathology for a century. But actually early in the 20th century, psychology had a huge human development component that was smashed by the two world wars. Before the two world wars, psychology did have this huge human achievement, human potential, realizing your human potential. But because the world wars were so debilitating, especially World War II, were so debilitating to the psyche of the entire world, psychology and psychiatry and therapy really shifted to treating pathology, mental pathology. So Seligman's really kind of coming full circle again and bringing positive psychology, as he's branded it, to the world, because bringing back this old mentality of like psychology is not just about healing pathology, but also helping people promote more of what's good and right about themselves as well. So that's my elevator pitch for positive psychology. So that also takes time, trying to be kind of someone who's bringing this message to the world of positive psychology and things like that. That also cuts into my limited free time for writing
Mm.
and DMing and role playing. So it's kind of like where I'm at. So, but you guys have made me accountable. This is what I need. This is what I say. I need accountability. So the challenge is on.
All right. Well, thank you very much for answering those two questions.
Yeah.
Robert, what are your final thoughts, and what is your score for the Innkeeper's burden?
As for score, I think I'd give it an 8, which is quite high.
Wow. Yeah.
There's
Thank
one
you.
final comment I want to make, and that's Andrew mentioned that he'd get round to rewriting the story you've been talking about. I don't think it needs much of a rewrite. There's one thing that the thing that gave me most difficulty was actually in the first paragraph, maybe in the first sentence. As he walked back to his inn, that was highly misleading because it immediately gave me a picture of him just like walking up to a path to his inn, which was just there. In fact, what you meant was during the walk back to his inn. In other words, it was probably a distance measured in miles, and the inn was nowhere in sight yet.
Right.
So
Yeah. Good
we need
point.
to change that to stop it being misleading. There's just a couple of other very, very minor points. Like there's a sentence where there are two rathers in it. You'd rather stoop to menial duties rather than reveal your secrets. I'm sure you'd get round to changing that. And there's a sentence later on that's got reacted and reaction in the same sentence. Now, that's all. And the fact that that's all I've got to say shows, after a careful reading, shows that the amount of rewriting it needs is negligible.
Thank you. And what's your rate for copy editing and proofreading, Robert? Like, I definitely need an editor, so I might need.
Just so you know, Robert, I got Robert to proofread my book too.
Okay.
And he does an
duly
admirable
noted.
job.
Hopefully-
So yeah, I'm helping to promote him.
You said it
Okay, I
like
might need your-
both of you are like alcoholics. You're like, all right, just so you know, I use this shrink as well, and really helped me out.
Yeah, we
I need
are
an
AA,
editor.
man.
I need.
AA.
Everybody needs an editor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Actually, what did you think about? What are your
I'm
final
going
thoughts on
to
score?
I'm gonna give it a 8 out of 10 as well for the potential that I see in it, because I can see this is like a diamond in the cutting, so to speak. It's like right now there's still a bit of coal in it, but it's not, I don't know, 14 karat. I don't know anything about gems, but I can see it being very polished. Not just polished, but that there's a lot more that is hinted at in this story that could expand all the way out if you so desire to take it that way. So 8 out of 10. The story itself is not badly written. It is very well written and enjoyable, but also like what potentially might come after is something that I look forward to as well. And yeah, that's my score. Keep on writing, man.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. So my final thoughts are, had a great fun time reading the story both times. Second time it was more about noticing all of the bits and references and the feelings of nostalgia. To get you going, to make sure that you listen to my ideas only. 3 out of 10. But the real score would also be I guess we are a unified front today, which is nice to see. It is an 8 out of 10. It would get even more from me if I wasn't holding myself back, because I know that just because I had this nostalgic euphoria regarding a couple of scenes, doesn't mean that it would translate to somebody else. So like a sober score would be an 8 out of 10, but with those, I mean, I got to feel like kid again playing second edition, so how could it not be a personal 10 out of 10?
Good. Mission accomplished, as far as I'm concerned. So as far as what I want to do.
No, that's not accomplished. There's a third one to write. No, Anthony.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. You're right.
Yeah.
Hey, Well, hey, I used it to keep myself afloat in a dry period of role playing, and if it gave you a nostalgia hit too, that's great. So yeah, that's what I wanted to do for myself, and I'm glad it did so for someone else or some other people. So thank you.
Mm,
Yeah,
of course.
I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
All right.
right.
Any last thing you wish to add, Anthony?
Hey, I'll talk to you guys soon, and whenever I know it seems like you guys kind of keep it strictly to the three of you, but if you ever want to invite me back, I'd love to come back. I'd love to chat with you guys and talk about some of these great classic stories you guys are hitting on.
We
And
we will consider it
yeah,
because we used to
all
be
right.
We
at
will
one time
consider.
we were four. Just so you know.
At one time, we
Oh,
were four.
really?
We
Yeah.
were
Okay.
the three musketeers with the D'Artagnan, but D'Artagnan decided to run away.
That D'Artagnan went to become his place in become the region of what did happen to D'Artagnan in Man in the
Oh
Iron
my
Mask?
god, I don't know.
She's looking after a farm, I think, in Poland.
Well, no, that's the real person. All right, that's it.
Oh, yeah.
All right, night's over. Anthony, thank you so much for coming. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. I hope you will have as much time, hearing this as we did recording it, because it was a, really interesting discussion. Um, Please read the story, The Innkeeper's Burden. Read it on the computer, as we have now found out. We will have a link in the doodly-doo. Um, and yeah, I hope everyone has a good week and enjoys themselves.
Yep,
Thank you for listening.
Yeah.
and just stay in the chat for a couple of minutes after we kill the recording, Anthony. We do have something to show you. But
Sure.
with that, everyone, take care. Goodbye, wherever you are, and have a
Yeah.
good one. Keep on writing. Yeah.
Keep on writing. And you
Yep.
won't get to see what we'll show, Anthony.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.